Well, hi everyone, welcome back to the channel and Happy New Year to you all. Here we are on the 3rd of January. What a beautiful morning it is here at St James's Park. I decided to come down here from the training ground just to have a chat to you guys because the transfer window is open. And where do I stand when the transfer window is open? Yep, here on this spot, on the car park above St James's Park, of course, the spot that I stood back in that day when the Newcastle takeover was pushed through back in October 2021, over 3 years ago now. In fact, it was just a little bit further down there, just past my car, down in the corner. That was where I was stood when I was engulfed by Newcastle fans as that takeover went through. This is what the car park's like, for those of you who don't know it, by the way. It is an icy, nondescript car park overlooking St James's Park, the castle on the hill, and this essentially is my office when it comes to transfer windows, because I'm stood here for years and years talking about transfers not happening, talking about why Newcastle aren't signing certain players, and here we have been for the last 3 years, albeit take out the last 2 transfer windows, talking about Newcastle signing players, and it's been a much better place to be in recent times. So anyway, enough of the waffle. Eddie Howe was chatting this morning ahead of tomorrow's trip to Tottenham Hotspur, in which of course confidence is so high going into that game, and so high in fact that Eddie Howe said this morning that his players are going to roll into that match tomorrow, just due to the mood that they're in right now. We all saw that against Manchester United the other night, swatted them aside, 2-0 going on about 6, and they're in as good a spot as I can remember for a long time. And I actually think, I said it before the Manchester United game the other night, that it was a good match for Newcastle to have. I think this is a really good game for Newcastle to have tomorrow away to Spurs, a Spurs team who of course, as we know, will open up and they will make it. They will make it not easy for Newcastle, but they'll play an open, attacking, expansive game that will allow Newcastle to do their stuff. And they've got the pace and the power in the likes of Gordon, Isak, Joe Linton on the break to do them some damage tomorrow. So yeah, it could be anything tomorrow. Do I see Newcastle winning? Probably. I think it's a good game for them to have, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a draw as well. But look, it's nice to go into the new year in a good vein of form, and certainly you can tell that confidence, as I say, is coursing through the veins of that squad right now, and you could sense it from Eddie Howe's mood this morning as well. Anyway, on to transfers, because that's what you want to hear about, and a couple of pieces of news from Eddie Howe's news conference this morning. Let's start with Alexander Isak, and obviously the player probably more than anyone else that you guys will want to remain as a Newcastle player beyond this window and this summer as well. And Eddie Howe was asked about Isak again this morning. A number of questions fired his way. He was directed towards the comments from Paul Merson yesterday when my colleague, the Sky Sports pundit, said that essentially Arsenal should break the bank to sign him. Now, I don't think his comments were taken too well by many of you guys, and I can understand why there's a bit of frustration there, but I don't think what he was saying was that they can just come and take him. I think what he was saying was, if Newcastle were open to selling him and Arsenal were able to, they should break the bank to try and sell him. I don't think he was making it out as though it was easy. I think that's probably just his language, the way he speaks. But Eddie Howe was asked about that this morning, and essentially ruled out him moving this January. He didn't say it definitely won't happen, but he said that is something that we aren't even considering this month, due to the fact that we want to have a great season, we want to do things this season. All my players are concerned about is having a good season and, you know, getting to the end of it with something tangible, whether that's a trophy, whether that's European football, Champions League football, whatever it may be. But I think that's as strong as Eddie Howe's been this morning when asked about Isak. And essentially, in my view, the way he spoke is he was issuing a hands-off warning and saying, look, nothing's going to happen this window in terms of Isak leaving. He's too important to us, and he doesn't see that being an issue this window. Now, he did say this window, which of course then casts a little bit of a doubt over the summer. I think the summer is a whole different ball game, and I think if a huge offer comes in for Isak in the summer, I think Newcastle would be in a position where they would probably have to listen to it. But again, it would be a huge offer, and Newcastle certainly aren't going to allow any club to come in and sign Alexander Isak on the cheap. So look, for the short term, I'm taking from what Eddie Howe said this morning that Alexander Isak will be a Newcastle player until the end of the season, and that's good news to you guys, because he's been, as you know, hammering the goals in 11 in his last 11 Premier League games, and has the potential to, you know, go for an unbelievable amount of money whenever the club do need to sell him. But should Newcastle qualify for the Champions League this year, do they need to sell him? Probably not, because he can achieve what he wants to do while playing in the black and white stripes of Newcastle. So that was the Isak news this morning. Some probably more surprising comments regarding Martin Dubravka. Well, I mean, he was asked about Dubravka and those links to Saudi Pro League club Al Shabab. There's been some claims, I think, over there that, and here as well, that an agreement is in place with Martin Dubravka's representatives and the Saudi club over a move there this month. It's complicated massively by the fact that Nick Pope is injured at the moment. Now, we reckon Nick Pope should be back within the next couple of weeks, and that obviously will change things somewhat, but from the way Eddie was speaking this morning, my reading into it is that Martin Dubravka will probably be allowed to go if he wants to go. Eddie said this morning that we have to respect what the player wants to do. His contract is up at the end of the season, and just, you know, just from listening to him, it sounds to me as though there is a chance if Nick Pope comes back and is fit and, you know, ready and back in the starting 11, Eddie would find it difficult to keep Martin Dubravka to be number 2 when he's got a big money offer on the table there from the Saudi Pro League. Now, it did raise questions in the press room this morning, and rightly so, because, you know, we saw what happened with the cup final a couple of years ago when, of course, Newcastle ended up playing their third choice goalkeeper. Were you to allow Dubravka to leave now, it would leave you a little bit thin on the ground, because if Pope then got injured, that would only leave you with Vlachodimos and John Ruddy as your goalkeeper. So it would be a similar situation to what we saw against Man United in the Carabao Cup final 2 years ago. That would be a very, very Newcastle thing to happen. But I can, you know, there's an argument to say, can you not just keep Dubravka until the end of the season, because you're leaving the door open for another issue like that. But then Eddie Howe obviously saying that he's got a lot of respect for the goalkeeper, been so pleased with what he's done in recent weeks since he came back into the team, and he used that word respect a number of times. He said we need to respect the players' wishes. So it sounds like Martin Dubravka has made it clear that he would like to go. Newcastle have probably said to him, look, we will consider allowing you to go later on in the window if Nick Pope is back and fit. But I know you guys think Newcastle have got too many goalkeepers, but how many of these guys are ready to play? I don't think Ruddy or Gillespie would be certainly used in a cup final if Newcastle got there. Obviously, I'm speaking hypothetically, and it looks to me like Vlachodimos won't be someone that Eddie Howe would want to use either. Remember, he arrived at the club in the summer as a make-weight in a deal that took Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest. Essentially, Newcastle didn't want to sign this guy. It wasn't a player that they had targeted, but Forest said, look, we will only take Anderson from you, and you need the money if you take Vlachodimos from us. He was obviously a high earner at the club, and they needed him off the wage book. So Newcastle were essentially given a player that they weren't really that interested in signing. So he isn't an Eddie Howe player, so it sounded to me it would be unlikely that it would be a player he would use, particularly in a big game like a cup final or a semi-final, or a game Newcastle need to win to get into Europe. So that complicates the situation, and even if Nick Pope comes back and looks good, I would suggest they're still thin on the ground despite having 4 goalkeepers at their disposal. So, bit of a surprise amongst the journalists in the room this morning that it sounded as though Dubravka could go later this month, because that is his wish, given the fact they've got so many big games coming up, and of those goalkeepers they've got, you know, Ruddy and Gillespie are essentially training goalkeepers, aren't they? And Vlachodimos would kind of then become the number 2, and if Pope got injured, he would probably have to be the number 1. Would Eddie Howe want that? doesn't sound so. So perhaps they would only do that, allow Dubravka to go if they were to bring in a goalkeeper of their own, to make it 5 again, which seems a bit ridiculous. But as I say, it's important to remember, of those 5, how many of those guys are actually ready to play, and how many of those would Eddie Howe be happy with starting with in his 11. And of the 5 he's got this moment, I would suggest the only 2 of those are Pope and Dubravka. So Pope with his injury, Dubravka, if he goes, is leaving you thin on the ground. So it's a complicated scenario at the moment, I have to say. But it sounded to me, the way he was talking, that Dubravka will be allowed to go if Pope gets back and in the team in the next couple of weeks. It might be one that goes through later on in the January transfer window. The last player of interest is Miguel Almiron. And Eddie doubled down again this morning, saying that look, we don't want to sell him, we don't have many options in the wide position. Look, I think Eddie probably has to say that because he doesn't want to, he wants the player to still be on board. I think if Newcastle got an offer that they felt was acceptable, I think Almiron would be allowed to go, but that offer hasn't arrived yet, and it sounds to me like there's probably 1 or 2 teams trying to get him on the cheap at the moment, and Newcastle won't allow that to happen. I think Eddie would rather have him there as a squad member, an option to come off the bench, rather than allowing him to go for pennies. So it would need to be the right offer. So it sounds a bit like the Dubravka situation. However, the Dubravka situation sounds a lot more attractive to the player than perhaps the Almiron deal is to Newcastle. So probably not the words you wanted to hear, because you want to hear that Newcastle are selling players, because that then allows you to then go and reinvest in players themselves. But look, the money that's on the table for Dubravka or Almiron is pretty much nominal. Yes, you're going to be able to have headroom to spend more than that, but you're talking small fees. I think you're talking 3 or 5 million for Almiron. Not too sure what for Dubravka. Remember, his contract's up at the end of the season. The Dubravka one would probably to keep the player happy, to keep Martin happy. The Almiron one, it sounds to me it's a different rule for him than perhaps it is for Dubravka. And also remember, it needs to be a deal that Almiron's happy with as well. And he's on good money at Newcastle. Is he going to be on that same money over in Brazil or in the MLS? It would need to be a very good offer to match or better than what he's on at the moment. So in Eddie's words this morning, Miguel Almiron, he wants to stay. Of course, if a huge offer, a big offer came in, I think that would change. But not what you guys want to hear, because I understand your point. Why do you keep keeping these players beyond their time at the club when they don't need to do that? I've seen a lot of things written in the comments on this and on Twitter about certain players that are still here that you felt the club could have released or allowed to go earlier, but Eddie obviously doesn't want to be left short, and he's worried that if they do sell, they're unable to then get a replacement in. So in short, from what he said this morning, Isak staying this window, Almiron staying this window, but I do think that could change. I think Eddie Howe's comments are very much to ensure that the player doesn't become disillusioned. And most surprisingly, of the 3, Martin Dubravka, essentially, it sounds like being allowed to go because he has to respect the player's wishes. So let's see how the next few weeks pan out. I think a couple will go. It sounds to me like Dubravka will probably go. I still think Almiron could go as well, but obviously Eddie would want a replacement lined up. If he's not got one, I'm not sure Almiron would be allowed to go. It's very similar to the situation we saw with Chris Wood and John Joe Shelvey, who both wanted to go because there were really good offers on the table. Eddie didn't want to lose either at that stage, but he felt he had to do it not just for the player, but because the club were bringing some funds in as well. So look, I don't think it's as simple as we all think. It's just a case of sell them. You need to make sure you're in a position that you've got either a ready-made replacement, or you've got someone who can come in the wings, and Newcastle don't really have that depth at the moment. So look, we've got a good 3 or 4 weeks ahead of us in terms of transfers. The fact Newcastle are playing really well at the moment, as I said, confidence coursing through the veins, that would suggest to me that you don't need to do too much this window. Botman comes back in, suddenly things are looking a lot better. But again, I think if the right deal came up and Newcastle managed to get a couple out the door, I do think they would move. But let's just wait and see. I couldn't believe how much things changed in the summer transfer window as from what we expected it to be at the start. So what I would say this transfer window is expect the unexpected. So that's it from me today, guys. Nice to see you all. Happy New Year. Looking forward to the next couple of games and the good form continuing, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers now, bye bye.